Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little 8-game Major League Baseball slate. This slate does carry some weather. I will check out the earlier slate too. It's a 6 o'clock-ish slate that features 2 games, so I'll do that at the end of the video. But before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel out. I really do appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get into the slate here. So first, the weather concerns. The weather here, and most concerning, the Chicago Cubs-Cincinnati game, also this Cleveland-Detroit game, and then for less concerning, uh, Seattle, Boston, Minnesota, New York Mets, Texas, St. Louis, and Kansas City, Chicago White Sox. So lots of weather concerns today. It's going to be a rainy day, it looks like, in general. So I think it's definitely going to be a slate to consider, to be monitoring that weather on, especially those first games, Cincinnati and Detroit and those cities. So let's look into the pitchers here. So we do have a core play at pitcher, and that's Paul Skeens. Now, he's been absolutely incredible so far. He's really not had too many bad games. He should be able to score over 20 fantasy points here against Houston, even though it is a little bit of a tougher matchup. He's done fine against the tough matchups. I mean, he had 20 points against Atlanta and LA, Dodgers, the Mets, Milwaukee. I mean, it's just he's been absolutely fantastic lately. His K rate is by far the best on the slate. He projects more than 2 strikeouts more than anybody else. So that's also nice for this particular slate. So I think he's a great option on this one. The other options for GPP plays, Eovaldi for Texas. He does have a little bit of easier matchup here against St. Louis. His K rate is also decent here, but his floor has been pretty low. He's had some really sub 8 fantasy point games mixed into all these really good scoring games. So he's my second favorite pitcher, but he definitely carries a little bit of risk because he has had some really bad games lately. Looking at Pivetta for Boston, he's another guy that I think is a GPP slash extreme GPP play. The thing with him is that he's been a little bit inconsistent, similar to Eovaldi, but he's been a little bit worse, and he's got a slightly tougher matchup here. His K rate's similar though, so I think he's in a decent place. He's a good contrarian option at this position. A couple other extreme GPP plays would be Gilbert for Seattle against Boston. Boston just projects really well. Gilbert has a high ceiling, but his floor is also kind of low lately, so he's definitely a high risk, high reward play, being this one of the more expensive options here. I also think Marsh for Kansas City has some extreme GPP potential today, as he's not as cheap as I'd like him to be, and he's had a rough time with earned runs this season, but he does have some potential here. Even though he did have a rough game against the White Sox before, he did play a second game against the White Sox where he just pitched 1 inning a couple games ago, but he definitely has some potential on this slate, despite his price probably being a little bit too high for the matchup. Looking at um, Montgomery for Arizona, he's also an extreme GPP play. He Washington is not consistent, and a couple of bats do look okay, but he has some upside, but it's very risky, so he's definitely a high risk, high reward play. I do have 2 Hail Mary potential plays here for you. Colin Ray from Milwaukee. Now, he's actually been pretty decent for the most part, but he's had some really rough games where he's been other negative fantasy points. So he's had, in the last 8 games, he's had 6 games over 20 fantasy points and 2 games under 10. So he does have some risk here because he's facing Atlanta, who has a good offense at times this season, even though they haven't been quite as good as we expected this season. He still has some potential on the slate as kind of a contrarian slash Hail Mary play. And then a true Hail Mary play is Holmes for Atlanta facing Milwaukee for his first start here. Since he's been in the bullpen, he's actually done pretty decent, and he can go a few innings at least. And he gets a couple strikeouts for the most part, though it is a great situation. He's dirt cheap at $4,000. I am going to make a couple lineups with him just to get him in there because he can really help you pay up for expensive options in the bats. And so he's definitely a good guy to look at pairing with Skeens, ironically. So he is high risk, high reward. He is a true Hail Mary play. I mean, he could definitely bust upside down and backwards here, but he's definitely a GPP only play from that perspective. Looking at the bats today, so we have a pretty interesting bat lineup today for the catchers. This position is pretty good. When I look at the catchers, I think that we have a couple riskier plays and the top here even. One being Cal Raleigh for Seattle. I like Cal Raleigh here, but he definitely, as he's been hitting the ball very well lately. However, he does have a tough matchup against Boston's pitching, so he's a little bit concerning here for against Pivetta. But his home run metric is off the charts today. Then we'll look at Salvador Perez for Kansas City. Now, he's been hitting home runs pretty well this season. He doesn't have the best home run metric today, but he's got really good hitting upside, and he's got a favorable matchup against Flexen from the White Sox. So he's definitely somebody I would consider, though he's a little pricey. Though he can also fit at first base if you want to do that. Danny Jansen is the third guy that I like for Boston. Now, he just got traded here, so uh, it looks like he's going to be an interesting position today as potentially their starting catcher. And if that's the case, he'll definitely be somebody I want to consider. His metrics are absolutely fantastic here against Gilbert. Even though Gilbert is a decent pitcher, he does have very favorable matchup metrics here against the pitching there in Seattle. So let's look at first base here. So first base, we're going to start with whoopsie. Hang on one second, guys. Sorry about that. Messed up my stuff. All right, we're going to start with Matt Olson for Atlanta. He does have great metrics here. He's probably my favorite play at this position, though he is fairly expensive today, and he's not going to be a great core play because he's a little pricey, and he has not performed all that well this season. But if we look at his recent play, he's improved lately, and his home run metric is off the charts. We can also look at Pete Alonso here for the Mets. Now, Alonso doesn't have the same home run upside today that Olson does. But he is a good contrarian play off of him as they're virtually the same price, and he's got a better overall matchup, I would say, in this situation against Richardson from Minnesota as opposed to Ray from Milwaukee. So, but I do think that both of them are very good plays on the slate. Vinny Pasquantino, meanwhile, does look interesting for Kansas City as a little bit cheaper option here. He doesn't have as much home run upside, but he's got really good hitting metrics today and a very good matchup metric here in general. Michael Bush for the Chicago Cubs. Let's see here. He also looks like a nice value play today. He has been pretty good lately. He has some inconsistencies this season, but he's got a very favorable matchup metric here, and he's a nice, really good value play at this position in general. I also like Jason Vosler for Seattle if you want to go with some more Seattle players. He has started off this last few games, and he's done pretty well in the games he started. So I think he's a viable play on this one. I don't think he's going to have a huge game, but he's dirt cheap at $2,800, and he projects pretty well today. Looking at second base, we'll start with Kilo Marte here. Now, Marte has been really good lately. He's hit 5 home runs in the last 10 games. He's got the best overall metric on this entire slate, I think, and he's going to have absolutely fantastic home run upside today. Again, I don't think there's too many players that have that kind of upside today. However, he is fairly expensive at $5,600, so he's going to be somewhat hard to roster. But the good news is at this position is we have several guys that have some potential, with Marcus Semien being one of them. Now, his home run upside isn't as high as Keatle's, but he definitely has some good hitting metrics today, and I do think he's a viable option here. I also like Jorge Polanco. Let's see, where'd he go? For Seattle. Now, he is day-to-day. If he's in the starting lineup, he'll be somebody to consider. He's had some really big games lately with some home runs, but he does have some lingering injuries, so that is a little concern here, but he is cheap, and he can help you pay up other positions. But if you go cheap at pitcher, then you don't necessarily need to utilize him. You could have some contrarian plays here in Miguel Garcia or Jose Altuve as high-risk, high-reward plays if you don't want to use Skeens. Looking at third base, we'll look at Rafael Devers first here for Boston. Now, his matchup metrics today are absolutely fantastic, though. Gilbert is a good pitcher. His home run upside, though, is here. Though I do think it's better to utilize the second base as an expensive play with Marte or Semien than to go to Devers. You can go cheap here with Josh Rojas, who's a really good value play for Seattle at this position, even though he doesn't have the home run upside. he's definitely got that hitting metric today, so he's definitely worth a look as a cheap play. Looking at shortstop, my shortstop has been really weird lately. As in the last week or so, not too many of the expensive guys have really done a lot. But if we look at today, Bobby Witt Jr. and Ella De La Cruz both jump off the page as really solid. Now, Ella De La Cruz has more home run upside today than Bobby Witt does, so do keep that in mind. But both those guys are in play. O'Neal Cruz, meanwhile, his metrics today are absolutely fantastic. He's been absolutely great lately, having some absolute monster home runs. And he's hit two in two straight games. His home run metric is best at this position. His just hitting metric is also extremely good today. He's a good hitter most of the time, so he's definitely somebody to consider in this match. But I do like him a lot as well. He's pricey though. Again, though he's a lot cheaper than the top two guys there. Corey Seager also in play here for Texas, and then Willie Adames is kind of a cheap contrarian play. Now he hasn't got the best matchup metrics today, but his home run upside is there on this particular slate, which he can do at times, and this is definitely a situation where I like him, though he is high risk, high reward going up against a Hail Mary pitcher from that perspective. Looking at our outfielders, outfield is kind of a weird position today, and we do get two of our top plays here, though, and Lane Thomas and Jake Fraley. Now, Lane Thomas has absolutely fantastic metrics for a home run today. He's been a little bit inconsistent this season, but he has been hitting the ball better lately. And so I do think he's a great option on this slate, and he's priced a little higher than I'd like, but I still think he's very useful today. Now, Fraley has really struggled to hit home runs this season, but he definitely has that metric today. I was a little surprised that he was looking so good today, but he does look great against Italians, so I think he's somebody you have to consider as a good option. Luis Robert Jr. For Chicago White Sox also looks really good today, though he is high risk, high reward as the White Sox don't project well as a team. He could be a one-off guy for a home run, which he is capable of doing when he does look decent. Sia Suzuki for the Cubs also has some home run upside today, as he has been hitting the ball pretty well lately as well, and he's a good, decent play. And if it wasn't for Lane Thomas, he would probably be a second or third core play there. Adolis Garcia for Texas also looks very interesting. He's a little pricey today for his potential, but he has some home run or bust kind of situational stats today, so he's definitely worth a look. But he's definitely very contrarian. And Hop is in play for the Cubs. Now, he has been hitting the ball better as of late, even though he's been inconsistent all season long. He definitely is high risk, high reward, though, because his price is a little higher than I'd like it to be. Another guy that's kind of a home runner best option, Eloy Jimenez for the White Sox. Now, he has that home run upside today, even though he struggled most of the season. He definitely high risk, high reward here. And then Will Benson for the Cincinnati Reds. He's had some good home run metrics off and on this season, and it definitely fits today, though the hitting metrics are not that great. He's kind of home run or bust in this situation as well. I do have some other guys you can consider: Jaron Duran, TJ Friedel, Mike Tauchman, Corbin Carroll, Randy Arizonia, Brandon Nemo, Harold Ramirez, and Willie Abreu there. So if we look at the other slate, hang on one second, let me get that up here. Sorry about that. Let's get this other slate up here. Okay, if we look at this other slate, we also find that the pitching situation is pretty strange. We really just have four pitchers that are pretty decent, and nobody really stands out too much. I do think Wheeler's probably the top overall play, and then maybe Bibby here. But I mean, I could do this as well with Flaherty and Bibby. I think there's really just a bunch of different ways you can do pitching on this little slate, as it's kind of a strange slate in general. But if we look at the pitchers, just kind of pick which teams you like the best to not do well. Which Detroit probably the weakest team of the four. Cleveland also could be limited a little bit in this one, so those are probably the safest route to go. But Wheeler's definitely looking the best overall. If we look at the bats here, if we look at catchers for this game, I think the Philly JT Realmuto is probably the best overall play here. He definitely has the most home run upside, at least at this position. Looking at first base, um, hang on one second. Sorry about that, guys. Looking at first base, we do have a couple guys like Bryce Harper and also Josh Naylor, who is day to day, though. Keep that in mind as decent options. Um, and those are probably my top two at this position. Not a whole lot to love at that position, though, in general. Looking at second base, we do like Jazz Chisholm Jr. here. He can also play in the outfield. He definitely has some good, interesting metrics today, especially with this him joining the Yankees now. So I really do like his upside in this one, and he has good home run metrics against Wheeler. Um, he's probably my favorite play, in fact, on this small slate, 2-game slate here. So he's definitely going to be somebody I'm going to consider today. Looking at third base, I don't think that there's too much that I like here. It's kind of an ugly position for this particular slate. But if you were going to go with anybody, maybe Matt Verling for Detroit is a good value option, or even go cheaper and just try to find a cheap play like Sosa or McKinstry if he's in the lineup or something like that. But it's a pretty rough situation there for at third base. Looking at shortstop, we do like Trey Turner a lot today. He doesn't have the best matchup metrics, but he definitely has the good hitting metrics, so he's definitely worth a look from that perspective. Kind of same with Volpe. He doesn't look great, but he does have hitting metrics that is definitely worthwhile there. And then the outfielders, Judge, Soto, and Schwarber are the top three guys there, outside of Chisholm Jr. at least, as they all have absolutely fantastic metrics despite the expensive plays and tough matchup metrics in general. I think that he's a viable. I think all three of those guys are extremely viable today, so definitely something to consider. A couple other guys, like I said, Kyle Schwarber. Oh, let's see here. Um, Stephen Kwan also has good metrics. He's also extremely expensive though here, so it's gonna be it's kind of a hard position to roster here to go cheap, as there's just not a lot of good cheap options in this particular match in this game from this at all actually. So I think that Judge, Soto, Kwan, Schwarber, and Chisholm are the best ones, and Chisholm is definitely going to be a core play at that position in my opinion. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments